It's the WPIAL Blitz Show. Bruce Badgley, Ian McMeans, and I'll tell you, Ian, it's that time of year. The number of games are winding down, but the importance of the games that we are playing is just off the charts.
Oh yeah, we crowned two WPIAL champions this past week. We're going to crown four more this week. So this is the best couple weeks of the season.
Oh, sorry about that.
I can hear myself talking over your phone.
Well, we just always like to check the audio. We just forgot to turn it down, but that's okay. Hey, how are the kids doing, by the way?
Kids are great. Got them all in bed. Everyone's doing good. So yeah, everyone's good. The older two just started playing middle school basketball, so that's been fun to watch. Our oldest is in eighth grade, so his games are a little more competitive than the middle one who's in sixth grade, and watching fifth and sixth graders play basketball, like I love my kids, but they just take it up the court and dribble into traffic and turn it over, and it's just this endless turnover fest. And you're like, please, somebody take a shot. Like it's
Yeah, people forget that really it's your kids that determine, like, what time this show goes on because
yeah.
they've got to be to sleep before we start this whole thing going.
Yes, although we have done shows before where I've been holding kids on my lap and they've, come and uh, spied in on the show before, but especially the younger ones, it definitely helps to make sure that they're asleep.
Well, thanks to all the fans who have kind of gone with us as we've because of travel and different things that we've been on different nights or whatever like that. We really appreciate it. It's been a pretty special year for me, up until now. I think that maybe one of the most fulfilling years that we've had, on our podcast of just the outpouring of fans of the show and everything else, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And just all the interactions that we've gotten this year have been great. And we really appreciate everyone that tunes in and listens to the show, whether it's live or later on. And I'm always, very honored by how many like coaches say, "Oh, I love your show. You put out great stuff." I'm like, you guys are so busy, like preparing teams, making game plans. You take time to watch our show. But, I've always said, I originally said I was a guy with a spreadsheet, but after 5 years of doing this, I guess I'm now a guy with a podcast. But this is just a labor of love for us, and just we just enjoy talking football and a little bit of history, a little bit of stats, a little bit of what's going on with the standings. But it's all come to fruition now and come to a head with the championship weekend here at Acrisure Stadium. I have to call it Acrisure because Heinz Field is now at Aliquippa. So, but this is a bit of a different weekend, right? Aliquippa is not in the championship games, and first time in 17 years they didn't make the title games. Very good season, very talented Quip team. Tyke Hayes off to Penn State, going to be a great college player, and they've got a lot of other talented kids. But this is now. Last week was technically the first round of the statewide PIAA playoffs. So this week, not only is WPIAL championship week for the four classifications that didn't play last week, but also, technically the statewide quarterfinals. So now we're really starting to get down to it too. And I think we're going to
Oh
have some
my.
interesting discussions on some really good quarterfinal matchups that are happening around the state this week too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started, man. Let's
All
spend
right.
the time on the games.
That sounds like a plan. All right. So thank you to everyone for joining us. If you are joining us, you obviously know where to find us on steelcityblitz.com, where I have my preview articles. I'll have some very in-depth previews of the championship games that are happening this weekend. You can follow us on social media as well. You know where to find us on YouTube. So we'll start in 6A with the championship game and Central Catholic. Congratulations to the Vikings and head coach Ryan Lehmeyer getting his first WPIAL championship as a head coach, and Central getting their first one since 2020, this was a big one for Central because potentially this would have been the first senior class this century that didn't win a WPIAL title. You can see, dating back to their first ones in 2003, 2004. So every group of seniors that started high school this century had won one until this one, and then this one pulled it off this year. So congratulations to Central, and they really came out with a game plan on how they were going to attack North Allegheny and really didn't even leave this one up to chance. I mean, just looking at the numbers, Central outgained North Allegheny by almost 300 yards in the first half alone. It was 31-0 at halftime. They came out throwing the ball, and first play Central ran was a 45-yard touchdown pass. So Central was just all over them from the get-go, and North Allegheny, kind of was like a deer in the headlights here. Of this was years of frustration for Central Catholic coming out, and all kind of coming to a head in this championship game.
When I tell people and the people that I know that do this podcast here, out east, always the question is how's Central Catholic? Okay. And I've mentioned on many occasions that, all is right in the PIAA universe when Pittsburgh Central Catholic, is relevant in, the PIAA tournament. And clearly, they've, I don't mean to say this, but they've kind of exercised the demons, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in getting over the hump this year. And I'll be honest with you, I think now the team can go one of two ways. So many times I've seen teams that are so focused on attaining a particular goal that they fall short in their next game because there's no emotion left in the tank. I don't believe that's the case with Central Catholic. I believe Central Catholic has, much loftier expectations for themselves as they move forward. What are you thinking?
I think they do, and I think this group of seniors wasn't part of that team in 2020 that last won a WPIAL title, but that was the first year we did our show. That was the midst of COVID and game cancellations and all that. But if you remember, and folks who watch our show probably will, because a lot of WPIAL fans have long memories, but that 2020 Central team, they were a really good team, and they won the WPIAL title. They beat North Allegheny in that game, and then they had to forfeit their PIAA game. I think it was against Erie McDowell because of COVID cases on their team, that they had so many that they had to forfeit or whatever. So they didn't actually get to play a PIAA playoff game in 2020, and they really felt that year like they had the team that could have gone a long way. I think Central York wound up playing St. Joe's Prep in the championship game, but Central really felt like circumstances just happened against them that year with COVID, and they had to forfeit their game because of players getting sick, but they never got to play that game, and that was really unfortunate for that group of kids. And now this group of kids, completely different group because different senior class, all that 4 years later, 5 years later, um, they're on a mission now, and Central has extremely high expectations. And Coach Lee Meyer, who we've had on the show before, we
Yeah.
we had him on the show back when he was the offensive coordinator at Seneca Valley, and he was doing a lot of really innovative stuff in his passing game. And Central had always been a very run heavy team. He brought a more pass oriented offense to Central. They put up a ton of points last year, dominated North Allegheny in the regular season last year, and then lost in a shootout in the championship game last year. And they graduated a lot of kids from that team, and that was a really good team last year. And they've still got a lot of extremely talented players. Jair Wells, their quarterback, Elijah Faulkner at running back. Faulkner's been around for a long time. He was the star of the show for a lot of games last year. But like Bradley Gompers, their outside linebacker slash tight end who leads the team in receiving, he's going to Duke as a linebacker. Xavier Thomas, their defensive back who also plays some wide receiver, is going to Penn State. So they've got some D1 caliber, high D1 caliber kids on this team, and they can make some noise in the statewide playoffs here. So let's talk about what's coming next for Central
Yeah.
after
Let's
they
talk
just
about that.
thumped North Allegheny. So first, looking at the statewide bracket here, We've got Central taking on State College in the top left quarterfinal. And then we'll talk about that game more in a minute. The winner of that game will face the District 3 champion, which will be between Harrisburg and Wilson, after Harrisburg upset top seeded Manheim Township. On the other side of the bracket, I think the most noteworthy result was probably St. Joe's Prep beating Imhotep Charter by the margin that they did. The other ones were all, I'll say, fairly standard. I guess you could say North Penn was an upset over Central
Yeah.
Bucks South.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think North Penn. I think that was an upset. Clearly, uh, in not that North Penn, doesn't have a pretty strong pedigree, but Central CB South. I mean, basically, got to this point and beyond. Last year, um, they had some tough games, but nothing. Obviously this close, and I would consider that to have been the biggest upset of last weekend.
Yeah, and now Central. So here's the interesting thing too. Central taking on State College here in this game. Both of them put up a ton of points last week. Central won 45-14. State College beat Williamsport 75-14. So both of these teams can score and can score a lot. And the stats prove it out. They're almost dead even statistically as far as points per game. Actually, they pretty much are. I think a little bit of rounding here and there, but points per game, points against per game, pretty much even. I think they both have talented quarterbacks. State College has a pretty good wide receiver in Ty Salazar and Eddie Corkery. Their quarterbacks thrown for 35 touchdowns and a ton of yards. So this is going to be a really good matchup between Central's defense and State College's offense. They've met 3 times in the past, Central winning all 3 of those. And Central has their eyes set farther, but this is going to be a really, really good game between these two teams.
I broadcast State College when they beat CD East a little bit earlier this year. Um, Eddie Corkery, I think, is totally underrated as a quarterback. Um, and Ty Salazar is just a fantastic athlete. He's probably a better lacrosse player than he is a football player. But State College, 75 points, that didn't surprise me. I mean, they beat Bishop McDevitt, I think 58-55. They can play whatever style of game you need to, or you throw at them. If you're gonna, play it ball control, ground the ball out, boy, they can play that. Coach Lintal, he's just does a great job in just rebuilding this team year after year. And I think we both know, Ian, State College lost an awful lot from that team, last year. And they're always at this point in the season. And this is going to be, I think, one special matchup between these two teams. And I'm really interested to see what style of play, comes out of it. As you said, these guys can run up the points or they can play smash mouth ball control, football. So I'm really anxious to see how each team is going to approach it.
I think you hit 2 key points there. One is State College seems to make it to this point almost every year, right? Their path to the quarterfinals out of District 6 is not incredibly difficult as far as the statewide bracket goes. But getting past this point has been a challenge, and especially getting all the way to the championship game where they've only been to the title game once. So I think for State College, this is kind of familiar territory, but it's navigating how to get past this point. That's kind of always been the hurdle for them. The second thing that you hit on was about different styles of play, and Central can do the exact same thing. They can pound the ball with Elijah Faulkner all game. He can be a workhorse back and just grind it out and wear you down. or they can let Jair Walls throw the ball all over the field. And they've got speedy, talented receivers. They've got a good kicker who's got some D1 offers from some MAC schools. They've got Xavier Thomas, who also returns kicks for them, is one of the fastest kids in the WPIAL. Like, if State College kicks off to him, they're in trouble. And that's the things that you don't always see necessarily when you start to get out of your bubble, right? Like Central in the Whippeal bubble, everyone out here knows don't kick the ball to Xavier Thomas. Uh, does State High know that in District 6? I mean, because if you watch film of teams playing against Central, you're probably going to see a lot of short pooch kickoffs, not kicking it deep. But unless you know what's back there, and you can look, Xavier Thomas, okay, Penn State commit defensive back, all right, he's got some speed, but until you actually see the kid run with the ball, like that's one of those things where do they try and kick off deep, or do they play it like everyone else did and kick it off short? And what's that do to the field position battle of the game? So I think the kind of the game within the game too, the chess match of how these teams stack up with each other and just what style of play they try and go to. But the one other point I think that should be made, given the passing game that both of these teams have, what Central has in Jair Walls and what State College has in Eddie Corkery, if either team gets behind, they're not out of this game. It is very capable both of either team coming back. So 14 point, 21 point lead in this game might not mean a whole lot, because that's one or two defensive stops, and then your offense catches fire, and it's suddenly a different ball game.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. State College plays in the Mid-Penn Commonwealth. They play 9 league games. Okay, so actually, they've been able to take a little bit of a breath the last couple of weeks here and recharge the batteries and emotionally recharge to get ready for this. And I think that, quite honestly, that is a big advantage that State College has in this game, is the fact that I think mentally and even physically they've been able to recharge and refocus and point all their directions to Cumberland Valley to try and get there.
Yeah. And State College has played some tough opponents as well. I mean, I'm not trying to
Bishop no, yeah,
Bishop
right.
McDevitt, and they played Harrisburg too, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's their only loss, or excuse me, one of their losses was to Harrisburg 7-6. So,
Right. So
yeah.
there's some familiarity too with the other teams, that if they get past this point, that Harrisburg potentially looming next would be another rematch game for them too. So yeah, and for Central Catholic, they lost their first 2 games of the year and haven't lost since. They lost to one of those national recruiting powerhouse all-star teams out of Maryland in week 0, which whatever,
Okay.
what one of those teams that has like 20 D1 kids on it or something, I think it was St. Francis Academy or something like that.
Yeah.
But and then they lost a close game to Pine Richland in week 1 and then haven't lost since then. So and Pine Richland's playing in the 5A championship. So this is, for all intents and purposes, Central's on a 10-game winning streak, and it has just been clicking on all cylinders for all those games. I think their closest game in that whole run was of the 10-game winning streak was the 27-14 game. They beat North Allegheny by the first time they played, and that's still a 2-score win. So both of these teams have been able to score a lot and blow teams out. So this makes for a fascinating matchup here.
Yeah, and absolutely right. Fascinating, I think, is the appropriate word, because even though that these teams get to this particular point in the season, fairly often, I think it is a completely different type of matchup this year than in years past.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget too that 2 years ago, State College beat North Allegheny in this round, who was the WPIAL champion. So,
Yep.
They have beaten WPIAL champions before, but like we said too, I think Central's on a mission, because the last time they got to this point in 2020, they I don't want to say got robbed of a game, but weren't able to play their game because of kids getting sick.
Sure,
So they
sure.
they they felt like they had a team capable of making a very deep run that year and didn't get to play. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, on to 5A, where we had the semifinals this past weekend. Uh, Pine Richland just grounded out over Bethel Park, and Bethel just was never able to get anything going offensively. Bethel had the highest scoring team in 5A. They were averaging like 42 points a game, and Pine Richland just ground them to a halt, and Bethel could not do anything. The other game between Upper St. Clair and Peters Township, Upper St. Clair kicked a field goal right at the end of the first half and then kicked off to Nick McCullough, whose name I think I've mentioned on almost every show this year for Peters Township. And he returned the kickoff for a touchdown. That was the only touchdown of the whole game. And Peters put forth a fantastic defensive effort to win 7-3. So now we get a rematch of last year's championship game, which Peters Township beat Pine Richland last year, but different year, different players, different teams. We get a rematch again. Just like in 6A, we had a rematch. We get a rematch in 5A between these two teams. Pine Richland has the pedigree, but Peters is the defending champion. So this one should be a pretty good showdown. I think these are two really good defensive teams. And I feel like this has the makings of a defensive struggle. Pine Richland, really good on the lines, really good in the trenches. Peters has some good skill position players. I think Peters has the better quarterback in Nolan DeLucia. I think Pine Richland has the better running back in McLean Miller. So, but Pine Richland can throw too. I mean, Aaron Strader, their sophomore quarterback's a bit of a dual threat guy. Has battled back from some injuries. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. If Peters skill position players can get open in the passing game. Pine Richland has one of the best defensive backs in the entire WPIAL in Jay Timmons, who's the son of former Steeler Lawrence Timmons. He's returned multiple interceptions for touchdowns this year. He also plays some wide receiver for Pine Richland. So these teams just match up so well against each other that it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And Pine Richland's only loss this year was to North Allegheny. They beat Central Catholic. Peters Township's only loss this year was a close game to Upper St. Clair that Upper St. Clair won 20. It was 21-7 was the final, but it was Upper St. Clair in that game returned an interception for a touchdown and had like a 70-yard touchdown run in the closing minutes to stretch it out and secure it. So Peters got their revenge on St. Clair and now has a championship rematch with Pine Richland.
And it's tough to beat it. They talk about tough to beat a team twice in the same season. It's also tough to beat a team twice in consecutive years for a WPIAL championship. And against John Ladon, I tell you what, just will be able to put something together, X's and O's wise. I think maybe that Peters Township may not be expecting. But you can't discount the fact that Peters has been on such a great roll over the last two seasons. And again, how much emotion is left in the tank for both of these teams? I think physically they match up very similarly. I think emotion is what tells the tale in these types of games. And I think just the whole emotion of Pine Richland losing last year to Peters could put them over the top. What do you think?
I think it could. It's definitely a strong motivation. And you're right with Peters about the run they've been on. Before 2019, they had never made a WPIAL championship game. And now they're in their fourth championship game in 6 years. So Peters Township as a program, I mean, Coach Plack has done an awesome job there of turning them from a team that was kind of middle of the road, like maybe made the playoffs, maybe just missed the playoffs. We're never great. We're never terrible to being, contenders for championships. And it took them a while to get there and get over the hump. And, we talk about learning how to win. Well, now they know how to win. And they made it to the state finals last year and lost to that really good Imhotep team. But now that Imhotep's moved up, 5A is kind of wide open. So whoever wins this probably is looking forward to and saying, hey, we think we've got a chance to make a deep run here at bringing home a state title too. So both of these teams, and especially for Peters having been so close and making it to Cumberland Valley last year and losing, I think for them, the motivation is not only winning another WPIAL title, but potentially going back and taking a run at bringing home their first state title in school history. But Pine Richland's a school with history, with experience, and with expectations, right? We talked about expectations with Central Catholic. Pine Richland expects to be here. This is their sixth WPIAL final in 7 years, and that run extends back to when they played in 6A before they moved down to 5A, and not only expects to be here, but expects to contend for state titles too. So I think both of these teams have really high aspirations. They match up really well on paper, and it should just be fascinating to see how this one plays out.
We've been talking all year about the high caliber of 5A football in the WPIAL. These two teams, it just exemplify that. And whoever comes out on top, in my view, um, is likely the team to beat, go whoever comes out of the WPIAL because of the high talent level, in 5A. And I think that they're the odds on favorite. But that's why we play the game.
It is absolutely. So speaking of looking ahead at the 5A bracket, we had some upsets in at least seed wise in District 3, who the WPIAL champion will face in the next round in the semifinals. So it was an eighth seeded Exeter against sixth seeded Bishop McDevitt here for the 3A title up on top. Roman Catholic, the team you've been talking about for a few years now, got their first inter-district win in the PIAA playoffs. They'll face Hollidaysburg, who won a tight game over Abington Heights. And then in District 1, was it Springfield Delco against Ruston, or the other two quarterfinalists here. So you can talk about this for a minute, and then I have a question for you after you talk about some of the statewide teams.
Okay. Well, first let's talk about, Exeter Township. This is really commonplace now for the lower seeded team in 5A in District 3 to make it to the championship. Now, this is the game that I'm broadcasting for Penn Live, Exeter and Bishop McDevitt. And wow, I mean, here's like the three or four time defending the District 3 4A champion, now in 5A, facing off against Exeter, who's just a year removed from being the 5A champion, in the district. And I tell you what, both enormously talented teams there. Great coaches, Jeff Wechter, a Hall of Famer for Bishop McDevitt, Matt Bauer for Exeter, just has done an incredible job. When he took over Exeter, people used to go to the games to watch the band. So I think his first 2 years he didn't win a game. So now it's the other way around. Now they're not losing a game. So Exeter, Bishop McDevitt, gonna be just an incredible matchup. And on the other side, Springfield Delco, Westchester Ruston, Ruston, finally kind of getting over the hump. And it will mean something for them to kind of get to, a state semifinal, but they have been just an exemplary program in District 1 for a period of time. They really just have that one system where they just run some more. I mean, they're like, they don't run the triple option, but they run as much as McKeesport runs, in the WPIAL there. They're just a machine. And up against Springfield Delco, who quite honestly, maybe didn't expect to be there. So I think that they're kind of playing with house money. They're playing kind of loose. I think Westchester Ruston, there's some pressure on them because they've been so good for so long and really haven't gotten, to the promised land. And also with, Roman Catholic and, Rick Preet, the head coach there, has just done an incredible job bringing that program along. And Hollidaysburg, Kind of a very interesting matchup, one that the PIAA has done to eliminate all these buys that we had and what have you. And I think it's just a very intriguing matchup that game's going to bring.
I think Roman Catholic's going to smoke them. Hollidaysburg played in the WPIAL for a while, and they were, at best, they were always kind of a borderline playoff team. They never really were a big contender as far as the WPIAL went. They went back to District 6, and have had some success there, which is a credit to their program. But I think Roman's probably going to wipe the floor with Hollidaysburg. So my question for you, and you kind of alluded to it to set me up, which was nice.
I
Given
do
the
that a lot.
given the upsets that we've seen in District 3 over the last 4 or 5 years that we've done this show, it seems like every year we're talking about, oh, this top seed in District 3 got upset. And not only did it happen here in 5A, where we have the 8 and the 6 seed playing for the championship, I'm going to go back a minute to the 6A bracket, where Harrisburg was the 4 seed, Wilson was the 2 seed, but Harrisburg upset top seeded Manheim. But it's not just this year that this has happened. It's been, a few years in a row now that it seems like these lower seeds are performing better. Do you think District 3 needs to rework their power rankings formula, because they seed teams based on this mathematical formula? And if they're seeding these teams based on this formula and the top seeds are getting upset every year, does it mean the formula needs to be looked at again? And you don't have to answer me right now. This might be a good topic for your Fresh Set of Downs show, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there as someone who's interested in, how these other districts work, because District 1 has a formula that's very different than District Three's formula. So, I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
It's all District Three's got. Okay, I mean they're look. It's the best that we have. Is it perfect? By no means is it perfect. I mean, Bishop McDevitt was the 6th seed. Now, the only reason they were the 6th seed is for some reason. I think maybe the formula needs to be tweaked a little bit. Um, but it's really hard, sometimes to, I know that you're taking into account your opponents and who your opponents are playing and yada yada yada, and it's somewhat difficult because of the regional nature of District 3 football now, to for this power ranking formula to be the be all to get all. The Mid-Penn Conference plays 9 conference games now. Okay, they play one inter conference game. Well, how are you supposed to have a power rankings formula, just based on one conference there? And you can't really get a clear picture of the power ranking of those particular teams if they're so incestuous during the regular season. So it's really difficult. So I think that I do believe that District 3 needs to look hard at tweaking the power rankings formula. 5A has been a good example of that. The number 1 seed has gone down each of the last 2 years in their first game. And that I think that is in function of the fact that we're so regionalized in how all of the teams play. There needs to be more. If you're going to use this power ranking as the be all to get all, you really have to have a lot more teams playing one another within the district. And right now, you're not. You have to go outside. If you look at the 6A teams, they're having to go out and play teams in District 1 and District 11, and not they can't play teams in the Commonwealth Conference because they're playing all league games. So how can you determine who really is the best team if you don't play one another, if there's no crossover play? So I think the District 3 has to take a look at the power ranking formula.
Yeah. Thank you. That was good to know. And just something that was kind of bouncing around my head of, seeing year after year where the top seeds go down. I'm like, are they being seeded correctly? And I know that you've said they're seeded based on the power ranking. So that leads me to ask, not only are they seeded correctly, but then is the power ranking formula itself flawed in some way? And I think you gave a really good explanation. And I, just putting the bug in your ear if you guys want to talk about it on the Fresh Set of
Yeah,
Down show.
we will.
Either, I mean, this week you've got a lot to cover, but in your season wrap up show is
Well,
looking forward to
if you
next
didn't have
year.
to put the kids to bed tomorrow, it'd be great to have you on to talk about it. So, we'll definitely after the show see if we can pull you away from the kids for a little bit and talk about these power rankings because it's beneficial because you're the one that creates your own power rankings. So you're one that can, I think speak educatedly about it.
I I have a ranking system, yes. Although this year my rankings did not like the District
Yeah,
12 teams
it
at
didn't.
all. And one thing I may have to do, and I've been kind of playing around with it on the side, is maybe with District 12 I need a different qualifier number for the Pittsburgh, or not Pittsburgh, for the Philly Catholic League versus the Philly
Yeah.
Public League, just because of how different those teams tend to perform. So maybe a slight adjustment for those teams
Well,
and not scaling all of District 12 together.
yeah, and some of those teams they have to play teams outside of the PIAA.
Mm-hmm.
I think that of when we look at your rankings or whatever like that, that's something that I think could be tweaked a little bit is somehow figure out how that fits in, and we can get into a much more detailed discussion. I think other than
Yeah,
on this show because it would probably take a whole show.
it probably would. And I do factor in out of state teams, but the one problem is that I basically just factor them in by wins and losses and classification size. So like some of the teams that like St. Joe's Prep played weren't very good this year. Like they played that Our Lady of Good Counsel team from Maryland, who was a 500 team. So it's like, okay, it's a 4-4 team. Like that doesn't really mean it, doesn't really help them a lot, even though they were an out of state opponent. So at any rate,
Anyway,
moving on from 5A to 4A, our little,
yeah, we all went
tangent
off on the
aside.
tangent there.
Yeah,
There we go.
it's all good. So on to the 4A championship game where Thomas Jefferson beat McKeesport. Congratulations, Thomas Jefferson, 11th WPIAL title for the school and 10th WPIAL championship for head coach Bill Chirpak, which means he has now won the most WPIAL titles of any head coach. So congrats, Coach Chirpak. He broke his tie with Bob Palco, friend of the show. They both had 9 WPIAL titles. And TJ also, kind of like with Central Catholic, now every senior class this century, or at least that started school since 2001, has won a WPIAL title since this senior class got theirs. So really good overall performance, and TJ just dominated McKeesport. We talked about this was a rematch game. The first time they met, TJ needed overtime to beat them. The first time McKeesport jumped out in front of them pretty big, and TJ had to come back. And when they interviewed Coach Chirpak after the semifinal game, when they beat Aliquippa, he said, we're playing McKeesport again. And last time we played them, they jumped out big on us, and we can't let them do that again this time. We've got to, keep it close or try and get a lead early in the game. And that's what they did. TJ jumped on them early and kind of just stayed on them, really shut down McKeesport's running game. Tyler Eber, the sophomore running back for Thomas Jefferson, had only like 33 carries in this game. So his string of 40 plus carry games ended, but 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. Braden White had a pick 6 and 11 tackles on defense, plus 68 yards and a touchdown on offense as a wide receiver. So all around great performance for Thomas Jefferson, really just controlled and handled the whole game. And their offensive lineman, Shep Turk, who's a Pitt commit, was just dominant in the trenches all over the place for Thomas Jefferson as well. So that brings us to now TJ taking on Clearfield out of District 9 in the quarterfinals. And this Clearfield team is a team that wants to run the ball. They've got 2 running backs that they will go to, with Brady Collins, who's put up over 2,500 yards and 36 touchdowns, and then Carter Freeland, who has over 900 yards and 14 touchdowns. District 9 hasn't done traditionally very well in the statewide playoffs. So we'll see how this one goes. This game's at Windber, though, which is a really odd place for Clearfield and Thomas Jefferson to play. So TJ's got the prestige, they've got the history, they've got the championships, they've got the coach that's done it before. Coach Chirpak's won 5 state titles in addition to his 10 WPIAL championships now. So I gotta like TJ, not only with the way they've been able to play, but just based on the experience too. And they just came off a game where they faced a run heavy offense. So facing another run heavy offense, I think syncs up really well for their game preparation.
And Clearfield, obviously, I mean, they're no stranger, obviously, to the postseason with all the district championships, which means that they have played a high level of competition very deep in the season on a lot of occasions. So I don't think that playing a team like Thomas Jefferson, especially in 4A, uh, is anything that they're not used to doing. I'd say if this was a team that this was their first district championship or what have you, and going up against Thomas Jefferson, there'd be a high degree of game shock. I don't think that that's going to be the case this time. I think that Clearfield's going to come ready to play, but no pun intended, they clearly don't have the talent level as Thomas Jefferson.
I agree there. I also think that playing in District 9, there's not a lot of big schools up there that they
No.
play against. So they do play against some smaller schools during the regular season. So winning the district title, they only have a couple other schools that they generally compete against for that too. So, but yeah, I mean, Clearfield's been on a little bit of a run here, third straight district championship for them. And, but they've never really made a deep run or a lot of noise. Actually, I think when I looked, if I remember correctly, they've never made it past the PIA quarterfinals. They've never
Right.
been to a state semifinal. So,
Right. And that's what I mean. It's like, they're not familiar with playing it with the level of competition. It's just they haven't had any success doing it.
yeah,
And, and so you have to believe that there's going to be a game plan. Like I said, when I talk about game shock, anytime you play, just as you spoke about the level of competition that they normally play, and then when they get in the PIAA, it's like, oh my God, I mean, look who's coming to town or what have you. I think that they're beyond that. I think that they can really game plan for a team of the caliber of Thomas Jefferson. I think that they're going to give him a game, but I would favor TJ.
yeah, I think TJ is going to win this one going away. This one might be close for the first half, but I think TJ's just got too much for them in the long run.
Hey, I do want to shout out to our buddies Jim Gorman, Chris Elm, for the thoughts on our live chat. We do this so that we can have fans interact with us on YouTube there. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And that's what it's all about. I mean, it's all about the fans. And if you got any questions, let us know. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely ask us questions if you have questions. We appreciate all the interactions that we get in the chat and any feedback we get on social media as well. So feel free to ask questions if you have them in the live chat on YouTube that's happening. So we talked about the matchup looking statewide at the bracket. Clearfield just edged out General McLean for the District 10 champion to get to this quarterfinal matchup with Thomas Jefferson here in the upper left of the bracket. The winner of this game will face the District 3 champion, which will be between Lampeter Strasburg and Wyomissing. And on the other half of the bracket, we had what was, I think, considered a pretty big upset with Juniata out of District 6 beating Shamokin. And then, the top half of the, I guess, east side of the bracket, technically, I think it's a fascinating matchup between Bonner Prendy out of District 12 and then Pope John Paul out of District 1, a team that you've really liked all year. So, why don't you talk about District 3? Because I know that's right in your backyard, but then I'm really fascinated by that Bonner Prendy Pope John Paul matchup too.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Lampeter Strasburg has just so totally overachieved. And I guess maybe not overachieved. I mean, they have just been a juggernaut all year. Big win for a second time over Twin Valley, who's a former #1 team. They beat Wyomissing at Wyomissing to win the district championship, or not district, but the conference championship, the Lancaster Lebanon League Section 4 championship. Now they're meeting, once again. And the interesting thing, actually, a big change in District 3 championship games this year is moving away from a home field advantage to neutral site games. So, going to be a little bit different, in that regard with LS. But wow, Vic Rittenauer and what LS has done this year is, I mean, just blown me away with how well they've played and how they've beaten, all comers to date. Um, Same adage, it's really difficult to beat a team twice within the same season, and let alone why I'm missing. So that could be really interesting. In that game, Bonner Prendy and Pope John Paul II. Um, Bonner is flown under the radar only because they're playing teams the likes of Roman Catholic, LaSalle, and St. Joe Prep, all season long. Had their coach on with us on a fresh set of downs a little earlier this year after a big win. And, they didn't mind playing those tough opponents. And, just kind of the same way that, you put a donut on a bat. Okay. And it's heavy and, you got to swing it there. I think that what they've got is they've got the donut off the bat here when they're playing John Paul II, that, they've played such high level competition that playing competition like John Paul II is going to be, within their wheelhouse. They are not going to be intimidated. And I think that both of these teams are just top shelf. And I just wouldn't want to pick a winner there.
I think both of them blew out their quarterfinal opponents. So both are coming in pretty hot. And why I'm missing on the other side is a team that a lot of us, here in the WPIAL have become familiar with over the last few years with the championship face-offs they've had against Central Valley a few years ago, back-to-back title games against
Yeah,
Central
beat
Valley.
Aliquippa for their state championship a few years ago.
Yeah, that was back in, I think, what, the early 2000s, like
Yeah, that was the
somewhere in
four
there.
classification era.
Yep, yep. But YO is a team that, from what I've seen out of them, always just plays good, sound, fundamental football and is just going to come out and pound the ball at you. So, in Lampeter Strasburg, you said they've overachieved, but I feel like I've seen their name pop up year after year when we've done this show. That seems like they get to about this point in the year that they've made some runs in District 3. I don't know if they've won any District 3 titles, but it seems like they've been at least a contender for District 3 championships for the last few years.
Vic Rittenauer took over as coach. I think this is the end of his fourth season. He's been a lifer coaching on the staff at LS, first as the DC and now as the head coach. And, he's kind of continued on the legacy, the consistency. And, that school district is on, an up and coming school district in Lancaster. Yeah, it's a great story, and they've gotten to this point. The last few years. Now they're trying to expand on that, and like with anything here, they're going to go up against most likely whoever wins between LS and YO in a semifinal against TJ. That's going to be one for the ages, quite honestly.
That is, and on the other side, I think whoever wins between Bonner Prendy and Pope John Paul really has a leg up on the other semifinalists between
Yeah,
Juniata and
I think.
Southern Lehigh.
Yeah, I agree. I think just for name value, you know what I mean? We talk about so much. Um, emotion and how much that plays into it. I mean, the top side of the bracket are teams that expect to be there, and then the bottom side of the bracket are teams that are glad to be there. And there's a complete, you approach things completely different as communities and coaches and players from each particular side of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. So, all right, on to 3A, where we had an upset in the semifinals. Avonworth, in a defensive struggle, defeats Amani Christian 14-6. Avonworth just ground them out. This was a 0-0 game at halftime, and Avonworth beating the top seed, the undefeated Amani Christian team, getting to the WPIAL title game for the third straight season now. And Central Valley, who, when they were the top ranked team in the state to start the season after moving down from 4A to 3A, and lost some games in non-conference play, kind of got written off by some people, and just have bounced back now and are back in the WPIAL championship game. An all-around dominant performance on the ground by Central Valley. Their top two running backs had almost 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns combined. And then their quarterback, Stephen Rutherford, had a 91-yard touchdown run as well in this game. So all around fantastic performance from Central Valley. But Elizabeth Forward, they're not going to go away. Their quarterback, Ryan Messina, he's only a junior. They've got some talent there, and they've been an up and coming program, so they'll be competitive again next year. But once again, we have Avonworth in the championship game, and now Central Valley back in the championship game. So these two played each other earlier this year as conference opponents. Avonworth won 21-14, and they've actually played the last couple years in non-conference play when Central Valley was up in 4A as well. So these teams are very familiar with each other. And this is one where I think it's the first time they've ever met in the actual playoffs, I think. Oh, yeah, I forgot to look that up for this one. I should have had it on the slide. But but this is
Don't be so hard on yourself, Ian.
yeah.
Don't.
The one thing I want to say here, you know, throw the top half of the slide off, because just points per game, record, all that stuff, because uh, don't let the non-conference stuff fool you, right? Avonworth played 3 teams from 4A in non-conference play. They played West Mifflin, they played Aliquippa, who was a semifinalist in 4A, and they played TJ, who was the 4A champions. Central Valley played Montour, who was the number 2 seed, TJ, who was the champions, Bell Vernon, who was, the 2-time defending 3A state champs, moved up to 4A, and then played a North Hills team the final week of the year just to get into the playoff, or not to get into the playoffs, but as their tune up for the playoffs, they played a 5A North Hills team. So Central Valley's overall record is not necessarily indicative of the quality of team they are. It's more reflective of how darn difficult a schedule that the WPIAL gave them. I mean, they basically had to start the season by playing what amounted to, a 4A semifinals 3 weeks in a row. And yeah, they lost a couple of those games, but now that they've been in 3A competition, they're right back in it. And, this is a coach in Mark Lyons who knows how to win big games. And Avonworth's coach, Duke Johncore, they've been the runner up the last 2 years. And, now this is all kind of coming to a head here of, who's going to prevail and be WPIAL champions. Because I think it's worth noting too, if you look at, the WPIAL championships since 2016, we've kind of had a continual changing of the guard here, right? That Aliquippa made it the first 3 years, or actually the first 4 years of that 3A existed. Only won one of them, but then got forced up into 4A by the success formula. Then, Central Valley went on their run, 3 straight WPIAL titles, 2 straight state titles. Central Valley gets forced up to 4A. Bell Vernon moves down to 3A. Bell Vernon wins 2 WPIAL titles. Avonworth's the runner up. Avonworth just moved up into 3A in 2020 as well. So Avonworth's only been around this level for a few years, and they won the 2019 2A WPIAL title and then moved up to 3A, and took them a couple years, but they've been competitive now, 3 straight championship game appearances. And now Bell Vernon moves up, Central Valley moves back down, and we've got Avonworth and Central Valley, kind of the last 5 years, 6 years really, of teams that have been among the premier teams in 3A now facing off for the championship.
And I'll tell you what, maybe this 3A championship year, this year, with the Avonworth and Central Valley. Just an incredible story of, here's both teams that expect to be there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and Central Valley, and Coach Lyons, with so much experience at the 3A level getting to this particular point, but Avonworth wanting to basically supplant these teams as, the standard bearer, going into the state tournament. Because what have you got? You have like, four consecutive state championships from the WPIAL 3A, and they just want to be, number five. And so it's going to be really interesting here. I think both teams emotionally have a lot left in the tank because they're both striving for expectations that far exceed WPIAL championships.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually it's 7 of 8. Since we moved to the
Okay.
6 classifications, the WPIAL champion has only
Yeah,
not
down to
won this.
Quaker Valley.
Yeah, Beaver Falls won it in 16, Quaker Valley won it in 17, Aliquippa won it in 18. I think 2019 Central Valley that lost to Wyoming area was the only one that didn't win the
Okay.
state title. And if I remember that game correctly, Central Valley had a 14-0 lead and Wyoming came back and scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to win that game. So it's been really the WPIAL has dominated at this level. And you're right that Avonworth kind of probably feels like, hey, if Bell Vernon hadn't moved down to 3A, we could have been 2-time state champions.
Yeah,
And
right.
and now they're, sitting here and it's like, oh, Bell Vernon moved back up. All right. And then Central Valley comes back down. So it's just a showdown of two fantastic programs, and we'll see where it takes us. I talked about that. So let's talk about the statewide bracket here, where the WPIAL is on the bottom left corner here. The WPIAL champion will face either Hickory out of District 10 or Penn Cambria out of District 6. So we'll see how that one plays out. Don't really know much about either of those teams. I know Hickory and Sharon have kind of been the two premier 3A teams in District 10 for the last couple of years. But on the other side of the bracket, some really interesting storylines here. You've been talking about Danville all year. They won a close game against Lewisburg. Scranton Prep won the District 2 title. Northwestern Lehigh, who made it to the championship game last year and lost to Bell Vernon, facing them in the other quarterfinal there. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the rest of the bracket.
The District 3 champion, Bermudian Springs, um, is just kind of like the team that nobody's talking about, but they really should. I mean, they've had a tremendous year, and they're going up against the Danville, who I figured was, going to be, the team coming out of, the eastern side there, but Scranton Prep and Northwestern Lehigh. I mean, my gosh, you talked about Northwest Lehigh, they made it all the way to Cumberland Valley last year. Scranton Prep has their only loss was to a team from New York, Canisius, earlier this year. There is just a lot of firepower, on the East bracket there. And the one team, like I said, that nobody's talking about is Bermudian, who I think has a real shot against Danville this week.
Yeah, that should be interesting. And Bermudian beat Trinity, who is another team that you talked about last week,
Yeah,
was a pretty good story. So should be interesting to see how the rest of this bracket plays out. I do like the WPIAL champions' chances once they get into the statewide bracket once
I
again.
do.
Yeah.
I do. I like the whoever wins the WPIAL championship's gonna get to Cumberland Valley. The question is that I think the four teams on the eastern side of the bracket just flip a coin. I think that they're all very talented, very good. Any one of the four can end up playing for the state championship, in my view.
Yeah. And I think, Danville's been a team that's been close the last few years, but hasn't quite been able to get all the way to the championship game. Northwestern Lehigh has been to the championship game last year, but didn't pull it off. Kind of got beat pretty handily by Bell Vernon. And then Scranton Prep to me is kind of the wild card in there of like, I don't really know what to expect out of them.
Yeah, they're going to be very good, and they have a good pedigree as well. This isn't a one trick pony. This is a team and a program that expects to get to this particular point every single season.
Yeah, and it should be interesting to see how this plays out this weekend in the other games. On to 2A, where we had two statistically pretty dominant semifinal results between Seton LaSalle beating Steel Valley and South Park beating Elwood City. Elwood City hung around with South Park for a little while, but South Park's in the trenches, with the Cunningham brothers was just too much for them, and ultimately South Park's running game just took its toll, grinding down Elwood City. So congratulations to Elwood on a great season. South Park and Seton LaSalle now meeting up in the championship game. And this is a pretty cool matchup between these two teams because both of these teams moved down from 3A to 2A this year and had been, kind of not great middle of the road kind of 2A teams. Seton LaSalle 0-10 2 years ago, and then last year went 5-5. They played in the same conference as South Park, and South Park beat them. I think it was 35-28. And that loss to South Park was what kept them out of the playoffs. And South Park got the last seed in the playoffs and wound up upsetting, I think it was Knock in the first round and made it to the quarterfinals last year in 3A. So, these teams have some history together. They know each other. They've played the last couple of years in the same 3A conference, now moving down to 2A. And very, very kind of different styles, though. South Park is very much a run the ball, ground and pound, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. We're going to take a 9-minute drive and just matriculate the ball down the field. Eric DeRue, their running backs, the all-time leading rusher in school history. And Seton LaSalle has a dynamic kick returner, wide receiver, playmaker, and Khalil Taylor. Their quarterback, Michael Pastirik, at least as of a few weeks ago, was leading the WPIAL in touchdown passes. He may have gotten surpassed over the last couple of weeks because Logan King, their running back's been doing a lot more work on the ground. But this one just sets up to be an overall great storyline game because if you look at neither of them have ever lost a WPIAL championship game. If you want to include Snowden Township, which was the precursor to South Park winning the 1955 title. These teams are a combined 8-0 in WPIAL title games. So someone's going to lose for the first time in a championship game, but also someone's going to win for the first time in 20 years. South
Yeah.
Park's last title was in 2005 and Seton's last title was in 2004. So this has been a long time coming for both of these teams. Really happy to see both of these programs get back to this point and should make for a fascinating matchup, especially given the familiarity that they played each other the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating matchup. This is what I think, six classifications is all about, is that it gives not the usual suspects an opportunity for a championship, and that's Seton LaSalle, and South Park this year. I think it's a total toss up here. I think that emotionally, both of these teams just totally dialed in on just this game and not looking beyond. There is no beyond for them. So I think that this is going to be just a great matchup. And as you said, one team's going to come out with a WPIAL championship for the first time in 20 years. Just a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is also a changing of the guard a bit in 2A that Steel Valley and Beaver Falls had met in the last two WPIAL title games. And Steel Valley had really been kind of the dominant force in 2A over the sixth classification era. And Beaver Falls, since moving down from 3A to 2A in 2020, had made every WPIAL championship game. This is the first year Beaver Falls isn't in it. And Beaver Falls went 0-10 this year, so they weren't even in
Ooh.
really close. But nevertheless, this is very different from what we've seen out of the WPIAL 2A over the sixth classification era with Seton LaSalle knocking off Steel Valley in the semifinals. this is kind of a changing of the guard here in the championship game. So should be interesting to see how this one plays out as well. Looking statewide, I think the biggest result to me around the state was what Central Clarion did against Farrell, because Central
Yeah.
Clarion playing in District 9, District 9 gets kind of maligned a lot because of, they just don't really play a lot of tough competition. And everyone coming into that game, myself included, kind of said, I'm really interested to see how they play against Farrell, who's always a tough team out of District 10. And they just wiped the floor with them. It was 41-6. I mean, that was a dominant performance there. So now the WPIAL champion potentially might have to play Central Clarion in the state semifinal just to make it to the championship game.
Look at this 2A bracket. I mean, up for grabs is definitely the appropriate word for this year. Obviously, Troy coming out of that bracket where they had defeated um, Southern Columbia along the way, but Bedford beating Steel High was a big one. Williams Valley, a team that's played very well over they've got a good pedigree. They moved on by beating Schuylkill Haven. Riverside has had a great year, but not the names that you're accustomed to hearing, in 2A football here in the state of Pennsylvania. And I think that that's what makes the 2A tournament maybe, the one to watch this year, because there's going to be not the usual suspect winning a state championship, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a wide open tournament. I think Troy followed up that very emotional win over Southern Columbia with a thumping of Warrior Run. So, last week we talked about would the tank be empty for them or not? And they proved it was not. They
Yeah.
still had a lot left in the tank. So I think Troy, to me at least, looking at things, is probably the favorite on the east side. And the WPIAL champ against Central Clarion now is going to be a fascinating matchup in the semifinals. And I guess I shouldn't write off Cambria Heights out of District 6, but just Central Clarion really opened my eyes after what they did to Farrell.
Yeah, it opened my eyes. I mean, you kind of think that it was going to be, Farrell against the WPIAL champ in the state semifinal, and that's the furthest thing to what happened.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In 1A, guess what happened? What we
Yeah,
expected to happen, or we're surprised, right? We've said all year this felt like it was two trains, one track between Fort Cherry and Clairton, that they were on a collision course, and now that collision course has come to its end. Fort Cherry dominating Jeanette. Matt Seg over 300 yards of total offense, 6 rushing touchdowns. Clairton did it again, shut out Bishop Canavan. And this was a Canavan team that was averaging 42 points a game. I mean,
yeah,
this was not a slouch Bishop Canavan team. They could score, and Canavan got into the red zone 3 times and came away with no points, which is a credit to just how good Clairton's defense is. And then Michael Ruffin and Drakir Jones, their 2 running backs, put up yards and touchdowns. And the other thing about this Clairton team, they're young. They only have like 3 seniors on this team. So this Clairton
wow,
team is young and stacked. And watch out, because this is going to be, I mean, this is what we've been waiting for all year, right? Fort Cherry and Clairton, undefeated teams, number 1 and number 2 in offense and defense statistically in 1A. This will be their 6th playoff meeting. They've actually kind of split them historically. Clairton's got the pedigree of winning so many WPIAL championships over their history. But Fort Cherry's the defending champs, just won their first title in school history, has Matt Seg, the Penn State commit, was the runner-up in the state finals last year. So, they've got their eyes set. We talked last year before the state championship game of, was this a state championship that was a changing of the guard between Steel High and Fort Cherry, with, the Irbies kind of handing it off to Matt Seg. And I mean, Matt Seg's a fantastic player, but what Clairton's done on defense this year, man, oh man, this is just an outstanding overall matchup, and I called it the unstoppable force against the immovable object, because Fort Cherry's offense has scored 40 plus points 9 times. Clareton's defense has only given up 2 touchdowns all year. They've pitched 10 shutouts, right? You've got Matt Seg, the Penn State commit, with over 1,100 passing yards and over 1,700 rushing yards, and you know almost 50 total touchdowns, 48 total touchdowns that he's put up this year. And let's not forget, early in the year, Matt Seg had a broken bone on his hand
Yeah.
and couldn't play quarterback, so he was only a running back, and so that's why his passing numbers were a little lower this year than they were in past years. But then you've got Clareton's defense, and this one stood out to me. They've got 114 tackles for loss this year. Like that's like I can't even conceptualize that. Like 145 negative plays between sacks and tackles for loss is just that's an absurd number.
That's incredible. I mean, that's averaging over 10 a game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like it's like, well, no wonder no one scored on them. They can't even move the ball on them. Just and 8 defensive touchdowns and averaging over 2 turnovers per game. It's this is I really don't know how to predict what happens in this game, just because you've got Fort Cherry's offense, which is so good with not only Matt Seg but everyone else they've got. What he can do with his feet, what he can and throw the ball. The other players they have in the backfield between Eli Silvani and Ryan Huey, and the weapons they have in the passing game with Shane Cornally and some of the other guys that they've got, and they're the defending champs, so they're always the champs until someone knocks them off. But I mean, Clareton is just so deep, and they stress you in so many different ways, right? Like Drakir Jones has run for 1,300 yards, and then Michael Ruffin's got 400 rushing yards and 300 receiving yards, and Dante Wright's got almost 500 receiving yards and almost 400 rushing yards, and Jeff Thompson, their quarterback's thrown for 1,800 yards and 27 touchdowns. So it's not just Clareton's defense; their defense is really, really, really good. But they've got so many playmakers on offense. I didn't even talk about their wide receivers between Terrace Wooding and Zamir Carell. They've got 4 receivers with over 300 receiving yards this year. They've got 3 guys with 14 or more touchdowns. Just they can beat you all over the field. And that really stresses a defense when you've got to defend sideline to sideline. It's not just defending a running game, it's defending a running game and a passing game. But Fort Cherry's got the same thing, right? Clareton's going to have to defend all over the field too. So this one, Clareton hasn't seen a player like Matt Seg this year, but Fort Cherry hasn't seen a defense like Clareton this year. So just to me, this is probably the most fascinating matchup of the weekend of Fort Cherry's offense against Clareton's defense.
And that's why I think that the coaching is really what's going to determine this. I think that whatever coach can, impose their will on their opponent the fastest, I think is the one that's really going to prevail, in this game. And who is going to game plan most effectively to get to accentuate their positives over their opponent's negatives. And I think coaching is going to have so much to do with this game because of all of the reasons that you just pointed out. There's talent galore on both sides, and who is going to have their team ready to play from the get-go, I think is going to mean an awful lot. So many times in games like this, teams will, kind of feel their opponent out. Nuh-uh, not in this game. Whoever comes out and starts attacking first and has success, I think is who's going to win.
And I will say Fort Cherry did that last year against Southside Beaver. They came out and just attacked them from the get-go. And that really, Southside Beaver ran a triple option offense and kind of took Southside's offense, and once they got up by a couple touchdowns, it made Southside try and change their offensive approach a little bit. That's not going to happen with Clareton because they can both run and throw. But the other thing too is the one thing that's always a challenge with this 1A championship game is that because it's the first game of the day and you've got 4 games at Acrisure Stadium, this one starts at like 11 in the morning. And just coming out to play at 11 a.m. for high school kids, it's tough to be. This game's always a very sloppy game in the 1A championship. And I really attribute it to the time, right? Like coming out to play and getting through all your pregame stuff at 11 and like, but it's you have to
Oh
wake
yeah,
up so
you're not
early just
used
to
to.
get
Well,
there.
and that's my point. I
Yeah,
mean, who's gonna like brush off the cobwebs and get out there and play football? Hey, listen, we have a great question from our buddy Jim Gorman on the chat, and he basically asked any thought on who had the tougher schedule between Fort Cherry and Clairton this season.
that's a great question. Let me say one other thing about this game, and then I'll answer that
All
question
right.
too. So I think the real key matchup here is Clairton, and I'll flip back to the overall stats here, but it's Clairton's defensive line against Fort Cherry's offensive line, because last week Clairton played a Bishop Canavan team with Cole Olszewski, their quarterback, who is very much a pocket passer, strong armed quarterback, and they just harassed him the whole game. They just chased him around. Their defensive ends were all over him, and he just had no time to get set. Now Matt Seg, more of a running quarterback, is a dual threat, can run and throw, can make plays on the run. Isn't going to get flustered if he gets flushed out of the pocket, but if for Matt Seg to have success throwing the ball, Fort Cherry's line is going to have to give him time. And if they can't give him time, if they can't block, then he's going to have to scramble. And yes, he can make things happen when he scrambles. But also, Clairton's got some really good playmakers in the secondary, too. And if he starts trying to force balls down the field, then that could be a bit of a challenge too. So, just comparatively speaking here, Clairton did play Steel Valley in week 0, who, Steel Valley was a 2A semifinalist. So that's a feather in their cap there. And they beat them 30-7. But that 7 was a fumble return for a touchdown. So it was not scored against Clairton's defense. I think overall, Fort Cherry had the tougher conference with Monessen, who scored a lot of points this year, Cornell, who had a very, very stout defense, and a good Bishop Canavan team. And Clairton played, Greensburg Central Catholic. They played Jeanette, who was a semifinalist also, but Jeanette had to upset 2 teams to get there to play Fort Cherry. Leechburg was a strong team as well. I think it's pretty close, but let's talk about some comparable results here, because they did play a few common opponents. Uh, they both played Sarah Catholic. Clairton beat them 43-0. Fort Cherry beat them 42-3. Basically the same.
That's a wash.
Basically the same. Um, uh, and they both played Jeanette. Clairton beat them 43-0. Fort Cherry beat them 49-14. Similar result.
Yeah.
They both played Brentwood. Fort Cherry beat them 56-14 in the first round of the playoffs. Clairton beat them 69-7. That was one of the 2 touchdowns Clairton gave up, but it was 69-7. And they both played Bishop Canavan. Now this is the one I think is the most interesting comparable result. Fort Cherry beat Bishop Canavan 49-34 in a shootout. Clairton beat Bishop Canavan 24-0 and shut them out. And that Fort Cherry Canavan game, Canavan was leading that game. I think it was 34-28 with about 4.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Fort Cherry scored a touchdown to go ahead, and then Bishop Canavan turned the ball over a couple times. And Fort Cherry, I think they had a pick 6, and then they fumbled again and scored another touchdown to kind of run away with it, make it 49-34. But that was a close game into the fourth quarter, with 4 minutes left between Fort Cherry and Canavan. So I think they've played similar schedules. Clairton's played a few teams from higher classifications between Steel Valley and Shadyside Academy. Granted, Shadyside was not a very good team in 2A. They didn't even make the playoffs. Fort Cherry's played pretty much all 1A teams this year. So I would give the slight edge to Clairton as far as strength of schedule and comparable results against similar teams. But overall, this is just a matchup of defending champions against, a team that's won a boatload of championships themselves. And, Clairton's a team that has those high expectations, expects to be in the championship game, expects to win WPIAL championships. And this is a chance now for this generation of Clairton kids to win their WPIAL championship, right? We talked about, the generations at Central Catholic and Thomas Jefferson that hadn't won a title. Well, Clairton's last WPIAL title was in 2019. So this is the chance for this generation of Clairton players to win their WPIAL title.
Great answer. Great answer. And a great question there by our buddy Jim Gorman.
Yes, thanks a lot, Jim. So looking statewide, not only do we have this game between Clairton and Fort Cherry, where the winner will play either the District 10 champion Wilmington, who used to be a WPIAL team back in the day, or Port Allegany out of District 9, who WPIAL teams have seen the last few years as well. But the big game this week, outside of the Fort Cherry Clairton game, is in the bottom right corner between
Yep.
Westinghouse and Bishop Guilfoyle. Westinghouse, the Pittsburgh City League champions, they had to win the City League championship with only 11 eligible players because of an incident that happened the week before. And yeah, they've got they've got a lot on their shoulders too after losing the last two 2A state championships to Southern Columbia. So Westinghouse is a team that's had aspirations of state championships and now moved down from 2A to 1A. And Guilfoyle is a team that has won state championships before. Also, they got forced up from 1A to 2A the last couple years. Now we're able to move back down from 2A to 1A. So that Westinghouse Guilfoyle game is absolutely one to keep an eye on outside of the Fort Cherry Clairton showdown.
Totally agree. You can't sell Muncie short. I think that that's a very good team as well. But I think that who's ever coming from that bottom bracket of Guilfoyle and Westinghouse is likely to play the WPIAL champion at Cumberland Valley.
Absolutely. And it would be kind of funny if, Westinghouse out of the Pittsburgh City League and a WPIAL team had to travel 3.5, 4 hours out to Cumberland. I guess it's only 3.5 hours out to Cumberland Valley to play a game when, they're right next door to each other, basically, here in Pittsburgh. But
Well,
it is what it is. It's how the state bracket works out. And really, honestly, I know what my power ranking formula says, but objectively, I would say that Westinghouse, Guilfoyle, Fort Cherry, and Clairton are probably the four best 1A teams in the state. So these are two state semifinal caliber matchups that we're getting in the quarterfinals this week, and should be a good one. Should be very fascinating.
Yeah, it happens that way sometimes.
Yep. It's just how the statewide brackets work out.
Yep.
So let's talk about our WPIAL finalists here. Clairton will be appearing in their 19th championship game all time. They've won 14 WPIAL titles. Thomas Jefferson just won their 11th. Central Catholic just won their 9th. And one other thing I think that's worth mentioning too is that Clairton and Thomas Jefferson are neighboring school districts in the Mon Valley and share the same zip code. So potentially you could have Clairton and TJ, the two teams from the same zip code, both both winning WPIAL titles this year, which would be pretty cool.
Wow.
And a lot of other teams who have, everyone here has won at least one WPIAL championship before in their history. Peters and Fort Cherry won their first ones last year, but no teams on the list this year that have never won a championship before. And the longest drought will be snapped in 2A, where either South Park, who last won in 2005, or Seton LaSalle, who last won in 2004, will claim a title. Overall, 7 of the 12 teams in the championship games were also in the championship games last year. So 5 newcomers, 7 repeat teams, and should be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, and of the newcomers, I mean, a lot of it had to do with the reclassification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Central Valley moving back down from 4A to 3A, Seton LaSalle and South Park moving down from 3A to 2A. So 3 teams out of the 12 changed classifications coming into this season. one other thing that we always look at every year this time of year, because we know that there are people out there who are interested in the public private non-boundary debate. So just something that we track, right?
Yeah.
So two of the teams in the WPIAL finals, Seton LaSalle and Central Catholic, are private non-boundary schools. The other 10 are public schools. And this is pretty much in line with, other than the 2021 year, which was an outlier, but it's pretty much in line with what we've seen historically, that, we get one or two private school teams and the rest are public school teams. So pretty consistent with what we've seen over time, overall, at least as far as the WPIAL goes. And, a lot of the debate I feel like that happens between public, private, is really focused on what happens statewide. And my contention has always been that the private school thing is not necessarily a WPIAL issue. It's more of a PIAA statewide issue. So
Yes, it is.
when you look at it this year overall, there are more private school teams in the quarterfinals in the state than there are in the WPIAL. 20% of the statewide teams are 20% of the statewide
Non-boundary
quarterfinalists are
schools.
non-boundary schools, right? And historically, that matches up with what it's been historically too. Over the last 9 years, it's been 21% of the statewide schools that have made quarterfinals are those non-boundary schools. So really, it's
Is
not
it
a
that big a deal? If it, you know what I mean?
yeah.
If 80% of the or 79% of the teams, are I would like, and clearly, I'd say that probably 80%. It would be great to see what the breakout is between boundary and non-boundary members of the PIAA. I have to believe that about 79% of the schools in the PIAA are boundary schools, and the other 21% are non-boundary.
You know what? If you talk for a minute, I have that number. Let me just go find it.
Yeah, well, it would be great to see that because then the amount of teams that are making it to the finals is only reflective of how the percentage of the teams are broken out across the state. If you've got that, that's a great stat.
I do have it. Yeah, and I will say one thing, it does depend on how you want to count the Philadelphia schools, because Philadelphia, technically, like Imhotep charter, the boundary is the whole city of Philadelphia, right? That they're a quote unquote public school, but they're a public charter school. Um, so there's that piece of it. And um the other thing too is, if Philadelphia has open enrollment between all their public schools, so anyone living in the city can kind of, they don't have neighborhood public schools in the
Right,
city of
right.
Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It's open
Mm-hmm.
boundaries, I guess. So depending on how you count those, but let's assume that all those charter schools in Philly count as quote unquote public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So in total, it's there are 49 uh, private non-boundary schools statewide, and there are 505 public schools statewide. So that means that out of the 554 total schools, only 9% of the schools statewide are private schools. So when
Okay.
you say there's 9% of the schools that are private schools statewide, but 21% of the quarterfinalists are coming from that 9%, there's a little bit of inequity there, right? That
Mm-hmm.
91% of the schools statewide are public schools, but only 79% of them are making it to the quarterfinals. This is why I've always said that the public private thing is more of a statewide issue than it is a WPIAL issue.
Yeah, and from that too, it's one that I think is highly localized in the public private scenario. I think that the percentages in certain areas are higher than in others too. So
Yep. And I think I think really the big, I feel like, point of consternation statewide really is the Philadelphia Catholic League,
Yeah.
right? Because those schools just operate by different rules. They get out of state kids that come there. And there's no secret about it, right? Everyone knows they get out of state kids that come there. And it's, Kyle McCord, who is now at Syracuse, was at Ohio State for a little bit. He played at St. Joe's Prep. He was the PIAA State Player of the Year, and he lived in New Jersey. Like his bio was Mount Laurel, New
All I could
Jersey.
say, look,
So
Ian,
yeah,
I'm not here to defend those schools either, but any non-boundary school who borders another state has got kids from other states attending their school. I mean, you don't think that kids from Ohio and New York attend Cathedral Prep?
probably do.
You
Yeah,
don't think, look, even in certain areas of the southern part of the state as well, that some of the some kids from other states are attending. So
yeah,
I think it's tough, but anyway. All
yep,
right, well,
yes. So that's that.
yeah, that's that.
Yep. We just for our listeners, I know we have people out there who have strong feelings about that, but we do track the data and look at it. It's not something that we shy away from. The other thing I do want to mention, though, that since we have the 4 championship games at Acrisure Stadium, formerly known as Heinz Field, this week, Clairton has the opportunity to tie the Baltimore Ravens as the third winningest team at Heinz Field, which is pretty incredible for a high school team, right? You consider Baltimore plays the Steelers there every year, and Clairton, has to get through a bracket to get there and then win a game there. So Clairton has a chance to tie the Ravens with 10 wins since Heinz Field is open, which is pretty darn cool.
This is like the wildest slide I think you've ever made that compares like the Bengals to Central Catholic. I mean, okay.
Yeah, it's how many wins do teams have at Heinz Field? Obviously, the Steelers and Pitt are 1 and 2, but Clairton has a chance to tie the Ravens for number 3.
Pretty interesting.
Yep. So if you enjoyed listening to us talk tonight, we've talked quite a bit about high school football because we love it so much. And this is a big week, right? It's WPIAL Championship week. We had a lot
Right.
to say. But if you want to hear us talk about the Steelers or hear me talk about the Steelers, actually, my Steelers podcast is recording tomorrow night, Tuesday night, because the Steelers play on Thursday night this week against the Browns. So we'll be on tomorrow night at 10 o'clock on YouTube. You can check us out on the Steel City Blitz YouTube channel. And Bruce, I know you've got your Fresh Set of Downs show also tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night, 7:30. We'll be talking myself and Dave Micah. Who knows who will stop by? I mean, it seems like we have some people stop by every week, but we're talking everything Eastern football, and then obviously we'll throw in a little bit of WPIAL stuff. Obviously, it's kind of setting the table for when Fresh Set of Downs and the Blitz show will merge for our Cumberland Valley show.
Yeah, that's coming up in a few weeks. So
Yeah,
just
we got to figure out a time. I mean, Dave
yeah.
goes to bed early and you've got to stay up late. So I don't know what we're going to do.
Well, we'll have to get our buddy Bob Long on again too, because
Yeah,
Bob was
right.
great last year. So, yep, we will prepare for that as well. We'll keep everyone posted. I think we should be good to go on Monday nights from here on out. But stay tuned to our Twitter accounts, which you all know. And thanks everyone for watching tonight. Check out SteelCityBlitz.com. I'll have very in-depth previews of the 4 WPIAL Championship games that are happening this weekend. So it's the best time of the year. It's WPIAL Championship weekend, and can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, I tell you, I can't either. Just some very compelling matchups and ones that we're kind of chomping at the bit because we're already projecting out because they technically are state at minimum state quarterfinal matchups,
Yeah.
in all these classifications. So technically, yeah, WPIAL is governing the games, but they're state quarterfinal matchups too. So
Yep, and tremendous statewide implications for what happens this weekend at Acrisure Stadium, and should be a lot of fun. This is one of the best days of the year. Four games in one day. All the best teams on display, and really these are the premier teams too, right? These are all top seeded teams. I think
Yeah, there's
Avonworth,
no surprises.
right? I think Avonworth was the 5 seed, so that was like the lowest seeded team to make it. But like, I mean, they were if they had beaten Beaver in week 9, they probably would have been the number 2 seed. So it's not really a surprise to see Avonworth here for the third straight year either. So it's an exciting time. I'm excited for it, and we'll be back next week to break it all down. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your night or day whenever you listen to the show to join us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of people tell me that, they listen to the podcast going back and forth to work or on the exercise bike or whatever like that. So, listen, thank you very much for joining us. Hey, listen, it only gets better from here, gang, as we come down to the games at Cumberland Valley. So, for my buddy Ian McMeans, I'm Bruce Badgley. Hey, we'll see you next Monday night at 9:30 for the WPIAL Blitz Show. Take care now. So long.